My mom called me the other day, sounding a bit teary. I asked, is everything okay? Yes, she said. I've just been listening to Adele's new album. If you've been hiding under a rock, then you might not know that Adele Atkins, the highest-selling pop star in history, just released her new album, 30. When asked to sum it up, she said simply, "It's about divorce, babe." Yet, in what has been called her most diaristic work to date, her album, I believe, is much more than about divorce. It's actually about having fidelity to self. In her nearly 7-minute sermon of a song, To Be Loved, one music critic claimed that Adele has now removed the distance between her music and her inner life. Indeed, she declares in this song, "It's about time that I face myself." And when she does, she takes stock of the messes that she has made and declares that I'll never learn if I never leap. I'll always yearn if I never speak. I'm so afraid, but I'm open wide. I'll be the one to catch myself this time. It is as if Adele has been listening to her own still small voice and putting that conversation to music. How profound it is to take something like divorce, a word that conjures up a big bowl of disappointment, failure, and shame, and recast it honestly and more accurately as a part of discovering one's own authenticity. Many of us get trapped up in the storms of our lives, and we either betray ourselves by allowing a different internalized voice of harsh judgment and of shaming to obscure our own self-worth, and letting the judgments and critiques of others affect us, or we direct our blame and our wrath at a proper target. When I'm honest, I can find myself moving between these poles back and forth. It is why I remember this line from the first comedy show I ever attended. The comic said, "My mind is a terrible neighborhood. I wouldn't want to live there." I remember vividly as she described the geography of her head being riddled with dealers of self-doubt, of fear and anxiety. And beneath my laughter, there was a recognition that sometimes we all hold the weapons to our greatest injury. It is a fundamental questioning of our belonging and our worth in this world. There are ways and times in our lives where we lack a commitment to the idea that we are fundamentally worthy of goodness, and we so quickly turn on ourselves. We allow our voice within to harshly critique our mistakes, our misfortunes, and failures. This noise, this unkind voice, if we invite it in, can take residence in our mind and even take up all of the real estate. And when that happens, there goes the whole neighborhood. It is exactly moments like these that the wisdom of Polish Rabbi Simcha of Bunum, who stressed authenticity and honest dealing with ourselves throughout his teachings, is important. He encouraged people to put the words, "The world was created for my sake," in our pockets. Practicing fidelity to self is a commitment to refrain from the ways that we betray our own self. It is letting go of the notion that the improvements in our behaviors and the lives we seek are because that there is something fundamentally flawed within us. Rather, the changes we adopt are to remove the obstacles in the way of our natural, authentic expression and power. This is our pathway to a deeper sense of purpose and meaning, Concisely, fidelity to self is a spiritual practice of being true to our own essence, and for some, an opportunity to discern God's will for us. And yet, how can we avoid needing that kind of external reminder, like a note in the pocket or the flattering words of another? When our fidelity to self lapses, we find ourselves in turbulence that does not serve our purpose, and we end up painfully disconnected from the most important part of who we are. We succumb to fears and our impulses driven by the chaotic and challenging world around us. Things can appear larger and grimmer than they actually are. And so what I have discovered is that there is a wiser, more honest, clear voice in the neighborhood. But I have to settle down and quell my internal melodrama in order to hear it. How many times do I berate myself for the misspoken word or mistake? How much time have I wasted worrying about other people's perceptions of me? On the other hand, I'm also guilty of my own denial, of not wanting to take a look at where I could improve because of the harsh voice within. And so I'm guilty of avoiding taking responsibility of my own harmful deeds. And so in order to get underneath those layers, the still small voice emerges. And it does so best for me in my contemplative meditations and in my prayer life. When I pay attention to it, I can begin to discern how to live with the alignment of my values and the very recognition of my sacred worth. In the biblical book of 1 Kings, this is exactly the kind of situation that Elijah the prophet found himself facing. And what we will hear in this story is the first mention of the still small voice. But before that occurs, frightened by Queen Jezebel's threats, dejected by his lack of followers, Elijah retreats into the wilderness, and he finds a bush and sits beneath it, questioning his very existence. He cries out to God in rather dramatic fashion, "This is too much. Now, source of all, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." After a period of existential crisis and denial, and this goes on for days. Feel familiar? He finally realizes he has an urge to journey to Mount Horeb for new perspective. There he found a cave wherein he bears his complaint to God even more viscerally. "God, I have acted zealously on your behalf, and the Israelites have not honored their covenant, and they want me dead." In other words, Elijah feels ineffective, scared, and he blames others around him. It's too relatable. How many of us have found ourselves bowing to our desire for followers to be well-liked, or bowing to our own fragility around our faults, or complaining about our circumstances, feeling like the world is out to get us? What I know when I feel this, I am at my least powerful. Then God tells Elijah to leave the cave and to stand vulnerably exposed to the cliff face. And then with a wind, God broke the rock, and then sent an earthquake, and then yet again a fire. And the text tells us that God was not in the wind, nor in the startling quake, nor in the fire. But rather, Elijah encounters the divine in the still, small voice. Elijah realizes that the divine does not need to be found in dramatic storm. Instead, being open and vulnerable, he has the opportunity to reconnect to his own sacredness despite the tumult around him, and attune to the very voice of his own soul. We too can become disconnected, living in a chaotic world, being enticed to compare our lives against those of others. And when we sever the connection to our true self, we find ourselves seeking answers in the external places, in the chaos, in lacking confidence in our abilities and our agencies. And we are tempted by the allure of things that don't truly matter. Practicing fidelity requires attention to our inner lives. It means living with integrity, being loyal with intention, following through on our commitments, understanding and doing the work that is ours to do, setting healthy boundaries, being willing to admit our shortcomings without drama, seeking repair. Fidelity requires that we do all of this without the drama of shame or fragility, so that we can lean into our growth and our learning. We are unfolding human beings. Here is where we can embrace authenticity and love. And even when the results we see are not the rewards we expect, we can still feel rooted in our own commitment to our sacred self. Fidelity is loyalty with intention and integrity, because without those, our loyalties can be based on popularity, on comfort, on pressure from others, or even nostalgia. And this takes a strong sense of confidence that takes a while to build. Adele reminds us of this. When asked why she's not appealing to the TikTok crowd, she says, "I've written these songs for people who have lived their lives." And so this kind of confidence should not be mistaken with arrogance. Simcha of Bunum not only tells us to put the message that the world was created for our sake in one pocket, but he also says to do that we must put another note in our other pocket. And in that pocket, we should write, "We are just a speck of dust." Navigating these two pockets is the balance of fidelity to self. Listening to our still small voice keeps us both worthy and keeps us humble. Elijah emerges from this experience with a deeper awareness of his calling. His responsibility to the larger community comes clearer into focus. We too can learn that living with fidelity to self is not narcissistic nor self-involved, but rather it gives us a firm foundation to understand our interconnection with all life. Our fidelity to those we love, to those that we are in community with, and with a strong enough foundation, we can even find that connection with those with whom we are embattled. The journey of revealing our true nature is coming to understand the power of who we were created to be, so that we remain connected to who we are when we realize our interconnectedness to all others. Ultimately, this oneness is where our loyalty and faithfulness lie. When we betray ourselves and our essence, we disrupt the entire chain. Attuning to the still small voice within is both so personal and at the same time incredibly communal. These past 2 years have been a time of fragmentation. Our trust in ourselves, our neighbors, our communities, and our country have felt frayed. And as we wrestle with how we might navigate during this pandemic and express the grief, the frustration, and the lack of clarity we have endured with so much, like Elijah, these times may have caused us to doubt ourselves, to remain in our anxiety and our fear, even to lash out at others. I know I have, and it is why I keep my practice of fidelity to self and to support my ability to sit still in the midst of a storm. I have a spiritual director, and this is what I do as a spiritual director, to support others. It is helpful to have someone to accompany us, to remind us of our divine worth, to remember that we are not our worst thoughts, nor are we our worst deeds. Someone to reflect back our life-affirming behavior. It is when someone can hold the container that we can begin to better attune to that still small voice and know that we are enough. With someone to support us settling the storm within, we can align our choices with our highest values. Imagine how that kind of vitality could allow us to face our mistakes more directly and to contribute to our communities more vibrantly. Living through such a time of disconnection and suffering, wouldn't reconnecting to our still small voice and extending our fidelity to ourselves and to the people and community we hold dear be a welcome way to enter this new year ahead of us? As Adele guides us, isn't it time we face ourselves? And when we do so from the foundation of a fidelity to self, regardless of the storms, it can be an authentic embrace. Thank you.